What's going on, everyone? My name is Burke, and today I will bring you the Week 7 power rankings for the PIC. Now, last week there wasn't any power rankings because, unfortunately, I was out of town the weekend before, and then I had a lot of stuff come up during the week, which meant I was unable to watch the matches, so I apologize for not having the power rankings last week, but I am back this week. I decided this isn't going to be a week 6 and 7, this is going to be week 7. Last week, it is what it is, and we'll just move on from here, and I did say this in week 5, but this will be quite a bit shorter, not terribly shorter, but in previous weeks, I had 10 teams to analyze. Now, there's just 8 because one dropped out, which means that 2 teams have bye weeks. So I only have to talk about 8 teams, so this is going to be quite a bit shorter as a result. So anyway, let's move into the number 10. And at number 10, I have the Meath Mamoswines. This week, Jim did not seem to plan much for Mew as a stally set. He didn't really have much to take it on besides Gengar, and that was pretty much it. Granted, it was Colberberry, so even something like Bisharp wouldn't have been able to do too much to it before getting burned, but still, you gotta have something for it. Maybe a more hard-hitting Gengar instead of Scarf, maybe a Life Orb. That would have definitely taken down the Mew. In the beginning of the game, he was really intent on letting his Tangrowth go down. He refused to switch it out, and then he stayed in an Arcanine with the Tangrowth, and he said it was a misclick. But even on the first time, he stayed in on the Arcanine, and it could have died right there. Maybe it was a prediction, maybe it was he just wanted the Tangrowth to go down, but still, I didn't really see the point of staying in at least the first time. Second time, misclick, misclicks happen. Future Set Reuniclus was cool. It didn't really do too much. It almost took out the Arcanine, but again, Arcanine, bulky, and then Arcanine is able to heal back up, so didn't really do too much. And he had no taunt on his team to deal with Stallbreaker Mew. Let his whole team get burned, and he had no way to remove it. He didn't bring his Miltank, so there was no Heal Bell, which meant that once the Donphan got burned, that's pretty much useless because it's a Rock Polish set. And that would have been pretty cool to see. It actually did quite a bit of damage to the Mew, but then it gets burned, and Mew is able to stall it out of health. I don't know, maybe he wasn't running Rapid Spin on his Donphan. He really needed to get rid of those rocks because they put on a lot of pressure on things like the Thundurus Incarnate. And even though he did have 2 Regenerator Mons in Reuniclus and Tangrowth, still, you don't want those rocks being there because that's just going to put on an unnecessary pressure when you have a very reliable spinner in Donphan. I do like the creativity of the Rock Polish Donphan. Unfortunately, it just didn't work this week. And this was just gradually, Jim's team got worn down. He let everything get burned, a lot of his physical threats get burned, and he just did not have enough to break through the defense that was the Cape Arboks this week. But at the very least at the end, Mega Galley was able to kill some things. So overall, this was, again, I think it was just weird planning on Jim's part this week. Like, he had some interesting sets. I've seen Future Set Reuniclus, it's cool. I've also seen AV Regenerator Reuniclus, it's pretty good. But I feel like it's week in and week out now. I used to see all the time Magic Guard Reuniclus week in, week out. Now, for some reason, all I see is AV Regenerator Reuniclus week in, week out. Magic Guard's still an ability and still a great ability, and I think that would have been a lot better because then he doesn't have to worry about statuses. He can set up a little bit and deal with things like the Mew. So anyway, moving on to number 9, I have the LA Doublades. This was kind of a weird battle for Carson and the LA Doublades. He did a good job dealing with P2, knocking off and killing it. Wasn't able to deal too much damage to his team. He relied a little bit too much on the Quagsire to be a wall to the Terrakion. Quagsire's good, it's not that good, and Terrakion can deal mass amounts of damage. It did 2-KO the Quagsire easily with close combat. He kept up solid momentum in the beginning with Rotom-Mow, but unfortunately, Terrakion's a thing, and Terrakion kills it. He didn't really have solid answers to Gliscor this match, aside from Quagsire with Scald, but even then, that's not a solid answer because it doesn't deal enough damage and it can't burn the Gliscor, so he decided to go with Clear Body instead of Liquid Ooze on his Tentacruel. Liquid Ooze would have actually been a better ability this week, just because it would help deal with things like the Vileplume going for Giga Drain. It would lose health, not gain health, so it helped wear it down. And he did use the Tentacle well to soak the sleep and then waste sleep turns, so he was able to wear down the sleep turns, and then he was able to wake up and start trying to burn the Mega Scizor with Scalds. Unfortunately, he doesn't get any Scald burns because that's the way it works. No luck with that. However, it was pretty neck and neck throughout that match, but then he made a play that just completely cost him the match. I mean, it still looked like he would probably lose at that point, but he quickly attacks the Cofagrigus, then SDs up, goes for Frustration, and then his Mega Pinsir gets burned, and then he sacks off the Victini to a Hex the next turn. The reason this was so bad is because Cofagrigus gets Mummy as its ability. That's like the one thing that separates Cofagrigus, however you want to pronounce it, from all other walls, is the fact that it has that ability Mummy, and it can shut down Pokemon that rely on their abilities like Mega Pinsir, like Mega Lopunny. It can shut them down just based on its own ability. And he completely forgot about the fact that Mummy was a thing. He tried to set up on it, he went for Frustration, it didn't affect because it no longer had Aerialate, and then it gets burned, and once that happened, he pretty much lost the battle. So I think one of the biggest things he has to keep in mind is, what is on his opponent's team, what are the abilities he has to keep a lookout for, because something really obvious like Mummy on Cofagrigus is not something you can forget. It's something easy to remember. It's also something that can save you a battle, as shown this week. So anyway, moving on to number 8, I have his opponent, the Dallas Darmanitans. This week, he didn't really bring much to take a V-Create on his squad. Didn't really need it, seeing as Victini wasn't able to put up too much offensive pressure, but then again, he doesn't really have much on his entire squad that can take a V-Create. At least not Choice Bandit. He could take Choice Scarf with the Terrakion pretty well. He played kind of poorly with P2. It did some damage to some of the Mons on the LA Doublades team, but it didn't really do too much. He let it get knocked off, and then it just went down really early in the battle, so I think he kind of played poorly with that. I did like how he used Vileplume, forced the Quag out every time, and dealt really well with the Rotom-Mow. It's one of those lower tier Mons that people kind of just look at and say, it's probably not that good. Vileplume's actually very good. It's bulkier than you would think, and it can deal with a lot of higher tier Mons that you wouldn't think it would be able to deal with. Terrakion was used well to force out Victini and kill quite a few things, being the Rotom-Mow and the Quagsire. I like how he's using Terrakion. It's not something that you normally see used well or at all. It's one of those Mons that it's good, but you don't really see it used at all. I don't really understand why. People more often use Cobalion than Terrakion. He didn't have to make a lot of crazy predictions this match. He just used every time the Terrakion switched in, basically something was going to die, and he was able to use that to kind of break through the defense on the LA Doublades team. And then once the play with the Cofagrigus happened, he just took advantage of that. He was able to take down Victini, neutralize the Mega Pinsir, and then Mamoswine would not be able to break through Cofagrigus. So that was a well-played game on his part, and I think he's really starting to get a feel for how his team works and how to use his defense to his advantage. So, good game, and I think if he keeps this kind of play up, he's going to do much better going into the next coming weeks. And at number 7, I have the Detroit Steelwings. They had a bye, so I'm not going to talk about them. And at number 6, I have the Denver Blitzels, another bye, so I'm not talking about them either. And at number 5, I have the Beery Butterfrees. This week, he brought an interesting Accelgor set. It didn't do much, but it was interesting nonetheless. Citrus Berry with Final Gambit. I get the logic there. I think it was going to do much because more often than not, you're not going to be able to get off the Citrus Berry because Accelgor dies to like any hit whatsoever. But it's a cool concept. If it actually worked, then it could do some stuff. It actually was a little bit detrimental because it didn't have the power needed to take out the Mega Sableye. So usually you're going to want to like slap a Life Orb on that thing because it can actually deal quite a bit of damage like that. Togekiss set was really good this week, put on a lot of offensive pressure, and Juan didn't really have too much to deal with it. And it was always able to switch in and deal with things like the Mega Sableye extremely well. He let his Manaphy go down to Mirror Coat from the Melodic. I think he should have probably scouted for Mirror Coat Melodic, as Juan has run it in the past. Just like a few weeks ago, he ran Mirror Coat Melodic with a Wakan Berry to deal with Thunderous Therian, and I think he could have scouted for that, but, you know, you can't always expect everything. As I said before, the Togekiss was always a safe switch in the Sableye. It prevented it from setting up, which Juan was really trying to do, always trying to set up with that Mega Sableye. He made sure to get rid of the rocks with his Zapdos so that every time Togekiss switched in, it wasn't taking damage. It didn't have Roost this week, so the more damage Togekiss took, the worse it was off. And without the rocks, then it didn't have to worry about that, seeing as Infernape went down first turn. And he really just capitalized on poor playing by his opponent throughout the match, made sure to preserve the Excadrill, Juancito, and the Togekiss really well throughout the late game. And just late game, as Juan kept trying to set up, he kept setting in the Togekiss and dealt big damage to anything that switched in, including the Mega Sableye. And then he made sure his Togekiss only went down when Mega Sableye was put in a really low range of health, and he could kind of clean it up with Excadrill. Overall, this is a really strong showing by the Bury Butterfrees. They knew to preserve their win conditions for the late game, mostly that Togekiss, just able to deal huge damage with it, and keep the Amityville Haunters from setting up and trying to sweep with the Mega Sableye. So great game. And at number 4, I have the Kutztown Krookodiles. So this week, I like the Cacturn set. He is really innovative with that Cacturn set. Spike setter with Destiny Bond, I really liked it. It was cool. It was able to set up a layer of spikes, and then Destiny Bond kill something, so it worked the way he wanted it to. Too bad on the paralysis, you know, get some paralyses. But as much as I like the Cacturn set, I did not like the Scumrachi set this week. Paraflinch things to death with Thunder Punch for the para, Ice Punch for the freeze, and then Iron Head for that flinch. And he was almost able to be successful with it against Mandibuzz, but Mandibuzz just wasn't having none of it. He did get lucky with the freeze on the Mega Metagross, but then started to play a little bit poorly around it, switching in his Landorus on the Mega Metagross. As it unthaws and then goes for an Ice Punch, he lost it to granted, that was a really good prediction by the Carolina Castforms. That was a really good prediction. And he lost Landorus Therian, which could have put on quite a lot of pressure on the Carolina Castforms team. He tried to make some good predictions with the Lando, going for Stone Edge on the Mandibuzz switch-ins, but unfortunately, Lando's not powerful enough to break through Mandibuzz. I didn't really understand why he didn't bring a Defogger this week. Why would you not bring a Defogger or a Spinner when you have a Talonflame? And once the rocks got set up, then Talonflame was pretty much useless because it was switched in, forced out, switched back in, and then what do? You have to Brave Bird and hope to deal some damage. It didn't really deal much damage because it seemed to be a more specially defensive set. And the Scumrachi did not work this week. He lost his Jirachi due to a crit. Talk about karmic retribution. And that foul play just clean took out the Jirachi. I think it was just a gradual progression with him being phased out a lot with the rocks up, because it dealt big damage to things like the Talonflame that could have actually put in a lot of work. And then Tornadus was just kind of able to clean up the rest of his team because Snorlax was banded. He locked himself into EQ in an attempted prediction, probably predicting the Metagross to come in to get some differential. Unfortunately, didn't work, and he kept trying to set up subs on the Tornadus. Tornadus is, of course, going to be running Sludge Wave, because if you have any fairies, it learns Sludge Wave, so it's going to run that. And this was just, I think this wasn't a good week for Zach and the Kutztown Krookodiles. His sets, I don't think, worked out as well as he wanted them to. The fact that he didn't have any hazard removal just gradually wore down his team until things like the Tornadus can just kind of clean up. It might have been a little bit different had Jirachi actually paraflinched the Mandibuzz to death, but, you know, can't always rely on hacks to win. So, moving on to number 3, I have his opponent, the Carolina Castforms. The Carolina Castforms, they have been playing, Trav, you have been playing so well these past weeks. I gotta say, you've been playing a lot better and really getting big wins these past few weeks, and this week was no exception. The early game freeze on the Metagross was unfortunate, but luckily for him, it wasn't too detrimental because his Metagross was able to thaw out a few turns later. He played really well around the Lando, making sure Suicune and Mandibuzz weren't taking too much damage from it, and were able to just kind of wall it really well. He was able to bring the Metagross and fire off a big Ice Punch to take out the Lando. It was a great prediction, and it allowed him to take out a big threat on his opponent's team. real quick. He used Druddigon well to phase out his opponent. I do not understand running both Roar and Dragon Tail. Either run Roar or run Dragon Tail. Don't run both. I actually prefer Roar for most of the time because, you can phase behind subs, but still, you don't have to run both. Run Roar, tack on something a little bit stronger like Dragon Claw, but, it worked this week. He forced Talon to kill itself, which was good. He phased it in on rocks after it already switched in on rocks, so it was at 1%, and it had to kill itself because, again, no hazard removal, so it was lucky, but it was bound to happen eventually that the Talonflame was going to come in on the rocks and then just have to kill itself off. Mandibuzz was just able to soak up the hits this week, barely avoiding the paraflinching to death, but able to roost back up and then foul play crit the Jirachi. So Jirachi tries to hacks out the Mandibuzz, and Mandibuzz crits the Jirachi to kill it in one hit. And this whole match, he was just able to stay ahead despite some hacks. And I think the biggest reason was he had the rocks up and his opponents had no spinners or defoggers, and they had a team that was weak to rocks anyway. And if you have that kind of team and you see your opponent, oh, rocks is going to put in a lot of work, let me just make sure to set them up. And he did. There wasn't really much that his opponent could do to bring that match back. And he just scored a big 4-0 victory this week. So it was a really good game. And he's just been playing so well these past few weeks, and I'm really impressed by it. So keep up the good playing. At number 2, I have the Amityville Haunters. And Juan, this was, I would say, not a very good week for Juan. First turn crit absolutely did not matter unless Ape was max HP, max special defense. I did the calcs myself. That was a max special attack modest Togekiss, and to a relatively not very invested in HP Infernape, it does well over 100% minimum. I don't really understand why you stay in on the Togekiss just to get up rocks. Your opponent has a Zapdos, a Togekiss, and an Excadrill for hazard removal on his roster, and he has all 3 on his team this week. One of them's bound to have hazard removal, maybe 2, and you don't know that, and really just sacked off the Infernape to get up rocks that were then just later defogged anyway. Rindo Berry Miracle Melodic was great this week. Took out a big threat in Manaphy, just like it did a few weeks ago with Wakan Berry Miracle Melodic to take out Thunder Syrian. He miscalced the Bullet Seed to let the Melodic go down way too early. You cannot keep the Rindo Berry on the calc, and Melodic went down very early when it could have healed back up on things like the Togekiss, because I don't think it would have done enough to kill Melodic. He made some fairly questionable plays. He let his Tauros take unnecessary damage throughout the game. Jolteon did put on quite a bit of offensive pressure. He did let it go down, I think, a little bit too early. Again, like a lot of these things, he was letting his Mons go down a little bit too early, and I didn't really understand what the point of just sacrificing Jolteon was for when he's got a relatively defensive Mon in Mega Sableye that he could have switched into, which hadn't taken a lot of damage at that point. He tried to set up with Mega Sableye multiple times, and some of them were on a Togekiss. What? It's a Togekiss. It doesn't even matter if it's not that offensive this week. The fact that it's a Togekiss and it's Stab Fairy and that you probably don't have any ways to take it down, you're not winning this battle. And he did it twice. Did not work at all, and each time he was forced out, and each time his Mega Sableye has a very low amount of HP. He was able to Wish Pass back into the Sableye to kind of bring it back into the game, but too much setup. He just played the game fairly poorly. He played the end game fairly poorly. He let Jolteon go down too early, which was the best way to take down Togekiss. He tried to set up multiple times with the Mega Sableye, and as Juan put it, he got too greedy this game. Way too greedy. You do not need to set up what you need to do. Like setting, if he decided to set up after he'd taken down the Togekiss, I think it could have worked. I think he could have set up and swept if Togekiss wasn't there. However, Togekiss was there. You cannot set up and sweep when there's a Togekiss with your Mega Sableye. So I think he's going to learn from this. He's going to take into account, okay, let's try not setting up as much. Let's make sure to slow down on that and take down the key threats to make sure my setup sweepers can actually set up and sweep. And at number 1, I have the Cape Arboks. There's really not too much to say about him this week. He almost got a 6-0, which would have been pretty cool. Colberberry Mew with Will-O-Wisp shut down almost the entirety of Jim's team. Like, just, he had no ways to deal with it, and every time Mew came in, it was able to burn something and then just kind of heal back up on pretty much everything. He played well around the Tangrowth. He did make some over predictions in the beginning. However, they were really low risk, as Tangrowth, once burned, couldn't really do much. and it looked like it might have been an assault vest. I'm not sure. I didn't see anything like leech seed or sleep powder, so I'm assuming it was assault vest. And once burned, he had really nothing to fear, and he let his Cold Berry get eaten up first turn, but then again, there was no Bisharp, so it didn't really matter. Really, he burned Jim's entire team, able to wear down almost everything and neutralize a lot of the physical threats, like set up Donphan. And his defensive core was just too strong this week. Sat on the field, 4 switches, and the rocks were up, and again, with no hazard removal on his opponent's side, he could just sit in, force the switches, and let his opponent take himself down. And it just became a straightforward win. And then at the end, used Raikou to help clean up Thundurus and Reuniclus. I think at the end, he probably could have preserved a little bit of differential by going into the Arcanine instead of the Garchomp. But again, that's very nitpicky amount of stuff. It could have backfired. You know, Jim could have gone for a Sword Stance, and then he could have lost differential by doing that, and that's why I never just go for the win, and he did. He made sure that after an Outrage, Rough Skin would take down the Mega Gallade, and it did, and he was able to get a really big 4-0 victory this week. Really not too much to say about it. He had a fat team, and Jim didn't have a way to break through the fat team. So this was the Week 7 Power Rankings for the PIC. I hope you all enjoyed. Again, I just want to apologize for last week. A lot of stuff happened, and I was not able to watch the battles, but we are back on track this week, and everything should remain relatively the same throughout the rest of the season up until whenever the playoffs are, which should just be actually in a few weeks. So thank you all for listening, and if you have any comments, think I'm wrong about some stuff, let me know in the comment section down below. But that's all I got for today. My name is Berk, and I'll see y'all next week.